Dear students, welcome back to the lecture series on solid state. In this session, we will have a detailed study of the three types of cubic lattice, namely simple cubic lattice, body-centered cubic lattice and face-centered cubic lattice. In the first part, we will learn how to find out the number of atoms per unit cell in each type of cubic lattice. Before moving on to today's session, let's discuss the assignment questions of the previous class. The first question was, most Bravais lattices are of the type option A, primitive unit cell, option B, body-centered unit cell, option C, end-centered unit cell and option D, face-centered unit cell. So, the Bravais lattices, there are 14 types of Bravais lattices and the primitive unit cell, that is a unit cell containing atoms or the motifs at the corners, only at the corners, is called a primitive unit cell. And each crystal system has a primitive unit cell. And how many crystal systems does we have? There are 7 types of crystal systems. So, in total there will be 7 types of primitive unit cell. Okay. So, the correct option is option A, primitive unit cell. So, among the 14 Bravais lattices, 7 types of lattices are of the type primitive unit cell. Question number 2, most unsymmetrical crystal system in terms of axial distances and angles is, the options given are option A, monoclinic, option B, triclinic, option C, rhombohedral and option D, hexagonal. We know that a crystal system is characterized in terms of the axial intercepts, namely A, B and C, and also axial angles alpha, beta and gamma. When we consider each of the crystal system, we have seen that a triclinic system has the intercepts are not equal, that is A not equal to B not equal to C. Also the angles, so alpha not equal to beta not equal to gamma. Okay. So, none of the sides are equal and none of the angles are also equal. So, the most unsymmetrical crystal system is nothing but the triclinic system with A not equal to B not equal to C and also alpha not equal to beta not equal to gamma. Okay. So, the correct option is option B, the triclinic system. So, it is highly unsymmetrical. And what will be the highly symmetrical crystal system? And that is the cubic system. So, for a cubic system, we know that A equal to B equal to C and also the angles alpha equals beta equals gamma equals 90 degree. So, cubic corresponds to the highly symmetrical system, whereas the triclinic corresponds to the highly unsymmetrical system. Now, the third question, a unit cell that contains lattice points only at the corners is known as, we have option A, primitive unit cell, option B, end-centered unit cell, option C, face-centered unit cell, and option D, body-centered unit cell. We have seen that in a primitive unit cell, the atoms or the lattice points are present only at the corners. Okay. So, the correct option is option A, that is a primitive unit cell. Now, what about the other three options? The end-centered unit cell. The end-centered unit cell is also known as a base-centered unit cell. So, in base-centered unit cell, the atoms will be present at the corners, and also the atoms will be present at the centers of the two opposing faces. Now, the third option is face-centered unit cell. As the name suggests, in a face-centered unit cell, the atoms will be present at the corners, plus there will be atoms present at the center of each faces. There are 6 faces in a cube. So, at the center of each cube, at the center of the face of each cube, you can find a atom. Okay. And the last option is body-centered unit cell. So, in a body-centered unit cell, there will be atoms or motifs at the corners as well as an atom at the center of the body of the unit cell. Okay. So, these are the 4 options. So, a unit cell that contains lattice points only at the corners is known as a primitive unit cell. Now, the fourth question, the axial relationship of a monoclinic crystal system is given as. The 4 options, option A equal B equal C, option B, A equal to B not equal to C, option C, A not equal to B equal to C, and option D, A not equal to B not equal to C. So, in a monoclinic system, the 3 intercepts, that is A, B and C, are of unequal length, that is A not equal to B not equal to C. Okay. So, the correct option is option D, A not equal to B not equal to C. And when all the sides are equal or all the intercepts are equal, then that corresponds to a symmetric cubic system. Okay. So, here the question is about the monoclinic crystal system, and a monoclinic crystal system is characterized by A not equal to B not equal to C. And the last question, the axial angles of a hexagonal crystal system are given by. The options, we have option A, alpha equals beta equals gamma equals 90 degree, option B, alpha equals beta equals 90 degree and gamma equals 120 degree, option C, alpha equals beta equals gamma not equal to 90 degree, and we have option D, alpha not equal to beta not equal to gamma not equal to 90 degree. We know that for a hexagonal system, it has got a hexagonal base. Okay. So, for a hexagonal base, we will have one of the angles as 120 degree. So, we have alpha equals beta equals 90 degree, whereas the third angle gamma will be equal to 120 degree. Therefore, the correct option is option B, alpha equals beta equals 90 degree and gamma equals 120 degree. Now, we will move on to today's session. We will have a detailed study of the 3 types of Bravais lattices of a cubic system. So, while considering a cubic crystal system, there are 3 types of Bravais lattices. We have a simple cubic system with motifs at the corners, which is called a primitive unit cell. And then we have a body-centered unit cell with atoms at the corners and also at the center of the body. Okay. So, usually it is denoted as I. And the last one is a face centered cubic system with atoms at the corners and also the atoms are present at the centers of each face, as you can see in this figure. So, this is a face centered cubic system. Okay. Now, let us learn how to find out the number of atoms per unit cell comprising identical motifs. First, let us consider a simple cubic lattice. We have seen that in a simple cubic lattice, the atoms are present only at the corners. Now, let me draw a simple cubic lattice. So, in a simple cubic lattice, we know that the atoms are present only at the corners. Okay. So, there are 8 corners in a simple cube. So, these are the 8 corners and at each corner we have an atom. Okay. Now, the contribution of each atom at the corner towards the unit cell is 1 by 8, since it is shared by 8 unit cell. That is, each corner is attached to another adjacent unit cell. There are 8 corners, so the atoms at each corner will be shared with 8 such adjacent unit cells. So, the contribution of each atom at the corner towards the unit cell is 1 by 8. Why? Because each corner is shared by 8 such unit cells, or each corner is shared with an adjacent unit cell. Total 8 corners, so 8 corners are shared by 8 unit cells. We have 8 corners, each atom at each corner. So, the contribution by 8 atoms towards the unit cell can be written as 8 into 1 by 8. Why 1 by 8? Because each atom contributes 1 by 8 towards the unit cell. So, there are 8 atoms. So, 8 into 1 by 8 is equal to 1. Therefore, the number of atoms in a simple cubic unit cell, simple cubic, or it may also be called a primitive unit cell, primitive cubic unit cell, is equal to 1. Okay. So, here we have considered a simple cubic lattice or a primitive cubic lattice. In a primitive unit cell, the atoms or motifs are present only at the corners, and each corner is attached to an adjacent unit cell. So, that means there are 8 corners, so 8 adjacent unit cells. So, the contribution of each atom at the corner towards the unit cell is 1 by 8. If there are 8 corners, there will be 8 atoms. So, the contribution by 8 atoms can be calculated as 8 into 1 by 8 is equal to 1. Therefore, the number of atoms in a simple cubic unit cell is equal to 1. Now, let us see a body centered cubic lattice. In a body-centered unit cell, so let's draw a body-centered unit cell. And we know that in a body-centered unit cell, we have atoms at the corners. So, at the 8 corners, we have atoms. In addition to it, there is also an atom at the center of the body of the unit cell. So, similar to that of a primitive unit cell, here also we can see that the contribution of each atom at the corner towards a unit cell is 1 by 8, since it is shared by 8 unit cells. Now, the atom at the center of the body of the cube is not shared by any other unit cell, because it is situated at the center of the body, that is not attached to any other unit cell. So, it is not shared with adjacent unit cells. So, we will calculate the contribution of the total atoms. Okay. So, when we consider the corners, we have 8 corners, that means 8 atoms. So, as we saw in the case of a primitive lattice, contribution of 8 atoms at the corners is equal to 8 into 1 by 8, so that is equal to 1. Now, there is an additional atom at the center of the body. So, the contribution of atom at the center is equal to 1, since it is not shared with any other unit cells. So, therefore, the number of atoms per unit cell, that is in a body centered unit cell, is equal to the contribution of 8 atoms at the corners plus the contribution of the atom at the center. So, that is 1 plus 1 equal to 2. So, the number of atoms per unit cell of a BCC lattice, BCC means body centered lattice, is equal to 2. So, in a body centered lattice, we have atoms at the corners, and the contribution of each atom at the corner is 1 by 8, since it is shared by 8 unit cells. We also have an atom at the center of the body, and it is not shared with any other unit cell. So, we have 1 plus 1 equal to 2. So, the total number of atoms per unit cell in a body centered lattice is equal to 2. So, next we will see a face centered cubic lattice. We know that in a face centered unit cell, we have atoms at the corners, and also there are atoms at the center of each face. There are 6 faces on the front, and this is on the back. Okay. So, atoms at the corners plus atoms at the center of each face. Okay. So, as we saw in the case of a simple lattice as well as a BCC lattice, here also the contribution of each atom at the corner towards a unit cell is 1 by 8, Why? Because it is shared by 8 adjacent unit cells. Now, let us consider the second case, that is the atoms are present also at the centers of each face. The contribution of each atom at the face to the unit cell is 1 by 2, since it is shared by 2 unit cells. That is, if you consider this face, okay, so there will be one atom at the center of this face. Suppose we attach another unit cell to this face. That means the face of that attached unit cell and the face of this particular unit cell will contain this particular atom. That means the one atom is shared between 2 adjacent unit cells. So, that means the contribution of each atom at the face centers will be 1 by 2. Why? Because it is shared by 2 unit cells. So, now let us calculate the number of atoms per unit cell. Okay. So, when the atoms are present at the corners, so what will be the contribution by 8 atoms at the 8 corners? Contribution by 8 atoms can be calculated as 8 into 1 by 8, since each atom contributes 1 by 8. So, that is equal to 1. Now, coming to the face centered, the contribution by how many atoms? We have 6 faces of a cube. So, there are 6 atoms. So, contribution by 6 atoms is equal to 6 into 1 by 2. And why 1 by 2? Because each atom at the face center is shared between 2 unit cells. So, it is 1 by 2. So, 6 into 1 by 2 equal to 3. So, therefore, the number of atoms per unit cell, that is for a face centered unit cell, is equal to 1 plus 3. So, that is equal to 4. Okay. So, thus we have found out the number of atoms per unit cell in a face centered cubic system. So, that is equal to 4. We have 8 atoms at the corners. The contribution of 8 atoms is 8 into 1 by 8 is equal to 1. We have 6 atoms at the center of the faces. There are 6 faces, so 6 atoms. Each atom at the center of the face contributes 1 by 2. And why? Because it is shared by 2 unit cells. So, 6 into 1 by 2 equal to 3. And therefore, the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 1 plus 3 is equal to 4. Okay. So, now we have discussed about the number of atoms per unit cell in 3 types of cubic lattice. So, in simple cubic lattice or a primitive unit cell, the atoms are only at the corners and the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 1. And in a body centered, the atoms at the corners as well as at the center of the body. So, the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 2. And lastly, the face centered unit cell, the atoms are present at the corners as well as present at the center of each face. So, the number of atoms per unit cell is given as 4. Now, let us see some problems related to the number of atoms per unit cell. The first question, a compound formed by elements A and B crystallizes in the cubic arrangement in which A atoms are at the corners of a cube and B atoms are at the face centers. What is the simplest formula of the compound? Okay. So, it is given that A and B crystallizes in the cubic arrangement. and it's given that A atoms are at the corners and B atoms are at the face centers. So, let us draw a cube representing the positions of A and B. Okay. So, that will make it more clear. We have a cubic unit cell, and in the question it is given that the A atoms are at the corners of the cube. Okay. So, we have 8 corners. So, on the 8 corners we can represent atom A. Now, what about the B? It is given that B atoms are at the face centers. So, there will be one B atom here, here at the centers of each faces, one on the front and one on the back. So, like this. Now, we have to find out the simplest formula of the compound. So, when A atoms are at the corners, it is of the type of primitive unit cell, atoms at the corners. We have 8 corners, so 8 A atoms. Each A atom will contribute 1 by 8. So, 8 into 1 by 8 is equal to 1. Okay. So, that means the contribution of the A atom towards the unit cell is 1. Now, let us consider the B atom. The B atoms, as we can see in this figure, are present at the center of the face. We have 6 faces, so there will be 6 B atoms, and when an atom is present at the center of a face, that will contribute 1 by 2 towards the unit cell. So, 6 into 1 by 2, so that is equal to 3. Okay. So, contribution of B atoms towards a unit cell is 3. So, in the question it is asked what is the simplest formula of the compound. So, for one A atom there are 3 B atoms. So, the formula of the compound will be AB3. This will be the simplest formula of the compound. Now, we will move on to the next question. A cubic solid is made of 2 elements P and Q. Atoms Q are present at the corners of the cube and atoms P at the body center. What is the formula of the compound? Again, we have to find out the formula of the compound. So, let us again draw a cube in order to picturize the position of P and Q. It is given that Q atoms are present at the corners. Okay. So, on the corners we can represent the Q atoms. We have 8 corners. So, the Q atoms are present at these 8 corners. Now, next is the P atom, and P atom is present at the body center. So, at the center of the body we have a P atom. Okay. So, now we have to find out the formula of the compound. So, we have the Q atoms at the corners. There are 8 corners. So 8 Q atoms. Each Q atom will contribute 1 by 8. So 8 Q atoms will contribute 8 into 1 by 8. So that is equal to 1. Now what about the P atoms? P atoms are present at the body center. It is not shared with any other unit cell. So the contribution is equal to 1. So for each Q atom there is a P atom. So the formula of the compound will be PQ. Okay. Now we'll move on to the next question. Sodium with atomic mass 23 crystallizes with a BCC structure. Calculate the number of unit cells in 9.2 gram of sodium. Okay. It is given that sodium crystallizes with a BCC structure. BCC means body centered cubic structure. And what is the peculiarity of a body centered cubic structure? We have atoms at the corners as well as at the center of the unit cell. Okay. So it is given the atomic mass of sodium as 23. Okay. So sodium, atomic mass of sodium is 23 gram. And we have to find out how many unit cells are there in 9.2 gram of sodium. Okay. So we can say that 23 gram of sodium will contain the Avogadro number of atoms. Avogadro number of atoms. And what is the Avogadro number? It is 6.022 into 10 raised to 23. Okay. So 23 gram of sodium will contain 6.022 into 10 raised to 23 number of atoms. So what will be the number of atoms in 9.2 gram of sodium? Okay. So number of atoms in 9.2 gram of sodium is equal to 6.022 into 10 raised to 23 divided by 23 into 9.2. Okay, so 6.022 into 10 raised to 23 by 23 into 9.2. So that will be equal to 2.4088 into 10 raised to 23. So the number of atoms in 9.2 gram of sodium will be equal to this much number of atoms. Okay. Now what is the question? We have to find out the number of unit cells in 9.2 gram of sodium. So in 9.2 gram of sodium we have this much number of atoms. And it is also given that sodium crystallizes with a BCC structure. So for a BCC structure, that is body centered, the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 2. At the corners the contribution is 1 and at the body center 1. So 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Okay. So the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 2. Therefore, the number of unit cells in 9.2 gram or 9.2 gram or 2.4088 into 10 raised to 23 atoms can be calculated as 2.4088 into 10 raised to 23 divided by 2. So that will gave rise to 1.2044 into 10 raised to 23 unit cells. Okay. So, in this question, it is you have to find out the number of unit cells in a particular gram of sodium, 9.2 gram of sodium. Okay. So, first using the atomic mass, you calculate the number of atoms in 1 gram of sodium, then you have to multiply with the given question, that is with 9.2 gram of sodium. The sodium crystallizes in a BCC structure. So, the number of atoms per unit cell is equal to 2. So, when the number of atoms is divided by the number of atoms per unit cell, then you will get the number of unit cells in 9.2 gram of sodium. Now, we will move on to our next question. A crystal of lead 2 sulfide has sodium chloride structure, and in this crystal the shortest distance between Pb2 plus and S2 minus ion, that is between the lead and the sulfide ion, is 297 picometers. What is the length of the edge of the unit cell of lead sulfide? Also, you have to calculate the unit cell volume. Okay. So, we have to calculate the edge length and also calculate the unit cell volume. So, in NaCl type structure, sodium chloride type structure, the structure is given here, the structure of the lead sulfide similar to that of NaCl. You can see that for a sulfide ion occupying the corners, the nearest Pb2 plus neighbor, that is the nearest lead ion, is at the edge center. Okay. So, this is the edge, sulfide ions at the corners, the lead is at the edge center. Okay. It is given that the shortest distance between a lead ion Pb2 plus and the sulfide ion S2 minus is equal to 297 picometers. Okay. You have to find out the edge length. Since the lead ion is present at the center of the edge length will be equal to 2 into the distance between a sulfide ion and the lead ion. So, 2 into 297. So, that will be equal to 594 picometers. Now, 1 picometer is 10 to the power of minus 12 meters. So, this can be also be written as 594 into 10 raised to minus 12 meters. Now, we have to find out the volume. So, volume of the unit cell is equal to, it is A cube, that is if A is the edge length, A cube is the volume. So, that is equal to 594 into 10 raised to minus 12 the whole cube. Okay. So, that is equal to, if we convert it into centimeter, so we get 2.096 into 10 to the power of minus 22 centimeter cube. Now, let us discuss some assignment questions. Question number 1, in primitive cubic unit cell, only dash of an atom or ion or molecule belongs to a particular unit cell. The given options, we have 1 by 4th, 1 by 3rd, 1 by 8th and 1 by 2nd. Second question, the total number of atoms in one unit cell of primitive cubic unit cell is dash atoms. You have to calculate the number of atoms in a primitive unit cell. The options given are 1, 8, 4 and 2. Question number 3, the total number of atoms in one unit cell of a body centered unit cubic cell is, the options given 4, 3, 8 and 2. Question number 4, the total number of atoms in one unit cell of a face-centered cubic unit cell is dash atoms. That is 2, 6, 4 and 8. Okay. So, in this session, we have learned how to determine the number of atoms per unit cell, and we saw that for a simple cubic structure, there is 1 atom per unit cell, whereas there are 2 atoms in a body-centered lattice, and in a face-centered or FCC structure, there are 4 atoms per unit cell. So, in the next class, we will continue our discussion on the calculation of other lattice parameters. Thank you.